I want to take a moment to highlight some of our upcoming programs. You can choose your own adventure at the Medford Library on Tuesdays at 4 p.m. We will read Choose Your Own Adventure stories and decide what happens next. Join us in Jacksonville on September 28th at 3 p.m. for Internet Security, How to Protect Yourself Online. And then the library is seeking community feedback on how we can improve the outdoor space around the Phoenix Library branch. We have 2 sessions happening in October. One is a Spanish language session that takes place on October 12th at 5:30 p.m. And the English language session will happen on October 19th at 5:30 p.m. All right. This program is a webinar, meaning that viewers are unable to turn on their microphone or camera. If we have time at the end, we will try to answer some questions from the audience. And in order to ask your question, you can use the Q&A feature of Zoom. We have turned off chat for this particular program. So today, in recognition of Banned Books Week, which is September 18th through 24th, we are having a panel discussion with JCLS staff. Our panelists include Library Director Carrie May, Assistant Director of Support Services Kelda Vath, Interim Assistant Director of Public Services Kristen Anderson, and Collection Development Manager Lauren Arnold. So Banned Books Week is an annual celebration of every person's freedom to read the books they want to read. According to an article from Book Riot and research conducted by Every Library, the majority of American voters have heard at least something about book banning, and 3 out of 4 voters say it is an important issue for them in the upcoming elections. A majority of voters also say that they are against banning books. Thankfully, the ALA, the American Library Association, puts together some wonderful graphics for us every year to celebrate banned books, and I'm using those graphics here right now. So you can see here, we've got some information about the 729 challenges that took place in 2021 and a breakdown of what those challenges look like. Like I said, there were 729 challenges in 2021, resulting in more than 1,597 individual books being challenged or removed. Just last week, the ALA released a report on book challenges from January 1st through August 31st of this year. And that stated that there have been 681 challenges or attempts to restrict library resources, with 1,651 unique titles being targeted. So that's a little bit different than in other years where a lot of the challenges were for one particular target, one particular book. This year, they've seen an increase in multiple titles being challenged at once. This is, sorry, next slide. This is a list of the top 10 challenged books in 2021. And it also has some of the reasons that they were challenged listed there beside the book. We do have all of these in our collection, and you are welcome to check them out if it's something that you want to read and see for yourself. Here you can see some of the reasons that just books in general are challenged in 2021. A lot of these terms, you'll notice they are heavily politicized. I'm not going to touch that, but I did want to demonstrate that the reasons that a book could be challenged are varied and individual. So the ALA also shares with us statistics on who is challenging those books. And you can see here that 39% are parents, 24% patrons, 18% are board and administration, and so on and so on. I think it's interesting to note that librarians are listed here as well. So challenges come from everyone, including librarians. And then this is where those challenges are taking place. You can see very few happen in academic or special libraries. About 18% were happening in schools, 37% in public libraries, and 44% in school libraries. So I will stop sharing there, and we will get to our panelists. So that last slide, it really brings me to the first question. What is a public library, and how is it similar to or different than a school library?
Well, I'll jump in and take this. So this is a public library. Well, we can't see her. We are in the Medford branch of the library right now. It is a public library. It is open to all members of the community that we serve, which is the Jackson County area. And we provide a popular lending library in multiple formats for everybody who's in the community. Now, a school library, where more of the challenges, or not that many more, but significantly more of the challenges are taking place, has a slightly different mission, and that's something to keep in mind when we talk about how this current phenomenon of book banning but I think before I do that, I'd like to talk about some of the foundational things that are important to libraries. Libraries from their beginning have been about First Amendment rights, have been about freedom to read, and the Library Bill of Rights dates back to 1939. The principles in it were not new at that time, but they were definitely it kind of explored through the earlier part of the century, and opposition to censorship and support of freedom of speech were part of that document. Subsequently, in the 1950s, we added our freedom to read statement, and that was co-authored by the American Library Association and the American Association of Publishers. It's been around since 1953. It was a direct response to the McCarthyism that was going on in that era and the actions of the House Un-American Services Committee. So while we talk about library neutrality, we also recognize that part of that history is kind of fundamentally grounded in recognition that access to all kinds of ideas is important, and that's important to who we are and what we do. So that's public library. School libraries have similar but distinct missions. In a school setting, you're going to find that their collections are going to be very specifically tied to the curriculums that are taught at the schools, and that the other thing that makes school librarianship unique is that when children are left at school, the school takes in loco parentis authority over those children, which means that there is responsibility that those school librarians have for those children that is not the same as the level of responsibility that public librarians have when we welcome children into our spaces. And so public libraries tend to be spaces where we would encourage children to explore the ideas that they're interested in. I know that I have seen situations where, you guys probably have too, where like kids are coming in and there's reasons they need adult books. So like sometimes people say, well, just have kids read in the kids' room, and that should be fine. But you only have to do it for a little while to see the times where that goes badly. Like, I don't know, the kid who's really interested in cupcakes and the only book on decorating cupcakes that's in the entire branch is an adult book. Well, that kid should and once you've said, well, that's important to do, it becomes very hard to logistically restrict the adult section in other ways. And should we is kind of the other part of the question, because that also is antithetical to what we want to do. We want kids to be able to explore these difficult ideas and for their parents to support them in those ways. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And maybe jumping ahead to multiple questions right now. So
the scope of the public library is so much more broad
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
that of a school library. So, I mean, really, we serve everyone. We serve the entire community,
Mhm.
all ages, all the residents, right? So it is necessarily more broad with a popular emphasis.
Yeah.
And I also want to add, you said, specifically, school libraries tend to follow the curriculum or support the curriculum of schools. And so sometimes we're the fun library, right?
Yeah.
And not to just some school libraries, they have great collections too, but sometimes they can't get that fun reading resource at their school library. And that's where we come in year round for those kids, is that they can come here for that, just reading what I want to read. And so that's really nice. And I think there's a natural partnership between school and public libraries. And I don't know if now is a good time to bring up what happened in the Medford School District recently. But I don't know how many of you are aware that at the end, kind of close to the end of the school year last year, the school district decided to remove the copies of A Handmaid's Tale graphic novel edition from all of their high school libraries. And they made that decision based on a complaint from an individual parent. And the policy that they had in place at the time was that any complaint about a library book in the school library followed the same policy for removal as a school curriculum book. And so as a result of that book being removed from the school libraries, the school administration itself said, you're welcome to go check it out at the public library. And so our demand went up a little bit, didn't it?
It did, absolutely. Yeah, we had a number of more holds on the title. I think it piques people's curiosity. When people are talking about a book in any way, I mean, if it's in the media, I think people get curious. And yeah, we did. We had to buy a couple of extra copies.
And so recently the Oregon Library Association, which is a organization that supports libraries and conversations among librarians around the state from all different types of libraries, they have an intellectual freedom committee that just keeps its eye on complaints that are made and books that are removed and in places throughout the state. And they did issue a statement in this case stating that their recommendation is, their observation is that what the school did is censorship and encouraged the school to develop sound policies for their reconsideration process and an avenue for parents to challenge materials in the collection and also to appeal the decision that was made by that reconsideration committee. So that kind of feeds into having good policies is always a good policy, right? For that. And, I'm not here to make any commentary on what the school did, just wanting to talk about, some of that distinction between us and school libraries, and then also how we support the community who are naturally more curious now that this book has been brought to their attention.
So that kind of leads into this next question of how does our collection management and maybe our collection development policy reflect the role of a public library? How do we choose what materials belong in our collection?
Yeah, well, I feel like a lot has already been said about that, really. We try to find materials that support our entire community. So it's regardless of age, race, but also income. So your needs may be different depending on where you are on income scale, your education level, the language that you speak, your literacy level, and tech literacy too, as well. And so it's really important to us that we provide a really wide variety of items. We specifically, yes, we have items that support education and folks learning about things, whether it's with school or just on their own, but we really focus on recreational and cultural as well. And those are really important for us. The kid who just wants to read a fun book and may not be able to get that at school.
Yeah, and different formats too. I mean, we have books in large type. We have for folks that need a little larger print sometimes. That's a good thing. And, I think we have our DVD collection. I mean, there's so many aspects to serving the whole of the community, that we really, I mean, it's quite broad. I mean, and a search in our catalog will show that, right?
Well, I'm glad you brought up DVDs, because one thing I was thinking of is how every once in a while you hear about how libraries are dead. That because everything's online, you don't need libraries, we don't need a physical collection, that sort of thing. And I'm thinking here in Jackson County in particular, we do have great resources that you can stream. So we have Hoopla.
Only if you have broadband internet access.
True.
I'm sure that's if you don't have internet, if you don't feel comfortable with computers, if if you don't have good access, much less access at all, then like your choices are limited. So being able to come to the library and get a physical DVD is really important.
Absolutely.
And you can still binge watch all the seasons of a show.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we know from talking to our rural locations that those DVD sections are incredibly heavily browsed and incredibly popular and needed in those areas. And those are areas that also just don't have the access to internet services that those of us who live in denser urban areas, or however we want to define our denser city areas.
Right. And similarly, I mean, sort of similarly, I mean, those of us with older cars that have CD players still, I mean, I like to still borrow music CDs and audiobook CDs. And so, but we offer both digital and physical items. And I think that's really important because you got to meet people where they are, and we do our best.
Yeah. Well, and same for print too. We see teens and kids all the time that they'll just flat out say, I want to read a physical book. So it's not something that's going away.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the pandemic showed us this too, right? You know, I don't know if y'all remember 100 years ago, or maybe it was only 2 years ago when we physically had to close our libraries at the beginning of the pandemic for the, as part of the Stay Home Save Lives order from the governor. And we immediately saw our online usage go up, right? Because, well, I can't get a book. I gotta have something. I'll go online and I'll look it up. We had new cardholders register, but as soon as our libraries reopened, that physical circulation started creeping back up because people really missed what they could hold in their hands.
And interestingly, the digital circulation has remained solid. I mean, it is continuing to increase, even as the physical is now coming back as well.
Yeah. And by the way, there was a point where we didn't know if this thing transmitted through library books. Like I remember, like early on when we were worried about phonite transfer and we were
Quarantining
books.
That's a different type of challenge. than I talked about the other day.
Yeah. Thank you.
And the other part of the question was,
So how do you choose what materials go into the collection?
yes, so I'm excited to talk about this because it means I get to talk about the collection development policy, which you can't read.
I will share the links later.
It's linked to on our website, of course, along with all of our policies. But it basically says, how we make decisions about the collection, like what are our goals and what's the purpose? The fact that, our mission is to connect everyone with information, ideas, and each other, and sort of how we do that, the importance of a balanced collection, the whole idea of a popular collection. So we really do focus on books that people just love to read and that are out now, that we have an unbiased and diverse source of information, and we're representing viewpoints, that's all in here. And that really guides everything that we do. So that's sort of the broad aspect of collection development. In terms of once we start to go a little specifics, what we think about are like what's popular, like what do people want to read, because we want people to read and read for fun, but also things about like how-to books and cookbooks and poetry and all of those as well. Is there some sort of historical significance? Is it timely, like the subject that's just now coming up that it's really important for us to read about? One thing that, public libraries do, different from school libraries too. It's that local emphasis. So supporting our local authors and having their books in the collection, but also books about the community. And sometimes we have some of the few resources that talk about that. Yeah, the books, are they classics and things that, are part of the culture now. And of course, the budget is that.
Oh my God. We can't buy every book.
Yes, and space.
Yes, that's
Considerations too, technically, yeah. And yeah, patron suggestions.
All right.
Wait,
Well,
so
let me,
with patron suggestions, do we just buy it if someone asks for it? And
They get evaluated, right?
We're using the same criteria,
Using
right?
the same
Yeah.
criteria as our selection policy. And I also wanted to mention, as I alluded to earlier with the graphic novel of The Handmaid's Tale, we also are data-driven and we run reports on book demand. So that's how we one way to keep tabs on what's popular and what people are interested in is through running reports. And so place those holds, because that's how you communicate to us that you want something, and then we'll go and we'll buy additional copies.
And I think it's worth pointing out that the management of the collection once it's been acquired is also a part of this.
Absolutely.
So when Lauren talks about space limitations, like one of the levers that we have to be able to add more books to the collections is that in doing that, we do have to also jettison books that may have served their useful life. And that can look like being worn out, but if it's worn out, you might want to replace it because
Absolutely.
it's been used.
Yep.
It could look like, okay, this book was popular and ephemeral for a short period of time, and now it has served its purpose and nobody's gonna ever read it again because it's super related to like really current events.
Or you could be Pluto and be declassified as a planet and then reclassified as a
Right.
planet.
Oh.
And making sure that your books are up to date on
Currency and
like
accuracy.
factual
Yeah.
changes that are happening in our world.
There's a
And-
whole manual about it.
Right?
Mhm.
And if you buy a bunch of books to meet demand, once that demand wanes, we may not need all those copies anymore, and we can give them to our friends for our book sales. So.
so as part of that, how do you know if something should be shelved in the children's section or the teen section or the adult area?
Well, a lot of items that we purchase, we learn about them through professional reviews.
Mhm.
Sorry, I have to wait a moment to remember that.
Words.
Yes. Because whether it's the American Library Association, Library Journal, Publishers Weekly, Kirkus, Book List, like all these library reads, these great resources where folks, usually librarians or just ordinary folks, will read a book before it's published and they're able to really evaluate it. Like, this is the sort of book that's great for a law library. This is great for a kids library that where the kids really love this particular topic or that sort of thing. And they usually talk about things like reading level and sort of the content, because those are things that really determine where it goes. Obviously, like the publisher will tell us as well where they think it should be.
Yeah,
Things like
publishers
that.
help too.
Yes.
Publishers like to specialize their imprints in different age ranges often.
I just want to say on the flip side of us saying earlier that we don't police where in the library a certain kid can go or an adult may need to go to the children's room for a particular book. Why do we then shelve them in these separate areas? Well, so that if you are coming in with your kid and you're with them, helping them select a book, you have a reasonable assurance that the books in that collection are appropriate, age appropriate for them. And so under your supervision, you know that you've started in the right place. And so there's some of that, I frequently go to the teen space because they write really cool books for teens. And I know I'm not a teen, but you might find me in there. So, so there's still that kind of assurance of the general audience, even though we're not limiting anyone in the library to a particular room.
It does have implications when you look at the highly challenged titles that we were looking at in your slide earlier, like the two top titles. are Lawn Boy and Genderqueer. Both of those are books that were published for adults, and we have them in the collection in our adult area. They're getting challenged though when they're in high school libraries, and high school libraries don't have that same flexibility with their spaces where they just have a collection. They don't have those areas, and so it has a different. It's a different approach to that same material, and I think that people are finding it jarring because they're not expecting that content in that area, like the idea of what people's expectations are. But those books are being purchased because of an award called the Alex Award, which is one of the Youth Media Awards through ALA, American Library Association, and that specific award is for books published for adults of high interest to teens, and that's why they're getting picked for high school libraries, is exactly because they're of high interest.
I will say one other tool from the support services side about determining a book. I know in my experience, there have been times when, you know, a selector might want to, you know, we want this book in our collection, but maybe we're not sure where it goes. And so maybe we want to look at it first and evaluate it in person, read through it. We also go through a cataloging process, right? And so, the way that cataloging works is there's a huge database of other libraries, of other libraries and what they've done. So we can also review what some of our peer libraries may have done to give us ideas. And you know what, we're not all the same, and we do things what's right for our library, and so we make those decisions. Yeah.
I was also going to say that I have had experience in multiple library systems where we make a decision to put a book here, and it may be a staff person who says, is that the right place for it? Or maybe a patron. It may come through a request for reconsideration of that material. And that did happen here. We had a patron upset that we had Lassie, the movie, in our children's department, and it's rated PG, and our general practice is that if it's G or lower, it's in kids. If it's PG, it goes in the adult collection, and not the adult video collection that you're thinking of in other contexts. It's not that kind of library. But that was an oversight on our part that we have a PG and the G. And so those types of adjustments to our collection, Harry Potter's really hard, right? Book 1 is meant for kids. Book 7, not so much. But if you started reading book 1, you probably want to read the whole series. So where's the cutoff point where some of it's in teens and some of it's in children's? Is it shelved both places?
And I think one of the hardest things is that there's no firm right or wrong for any of these questions, right?
No, and sometimes mistakes happen and we catch it on the fly. Girl Wash Your Face was in teen at one point, and that is not a book we have published for adults. Not really of interest. So it's not even so much that it's because it's like adult content in any kind of way. It's just, it's a book about being an adult. It's not a book that teenagers really have any interest in reading. It's kind of the opposite of the Alex Awards.
Kind of a follow-up question. What do you do when a book has been reclassified by the author or publisher? I'm throwing this at you. But what do you do in those situations?
So are you? So I'm trying to are you talking about the situation with Melissa's story and George, or are you talking what is this?
Was it Moss, Sarah J.
Oh,
her books were at one point classified as YA.
yeah.
She came out later,
That's
just
right.
as
Yeah.
the story has evolved, it's kind of become for adults.
It's kind of a new adult series. Like
Right.
I mean, Crown of
A new adult series.
It's like new adult as a publishing category, different than young adult, or kind of that into college and early 20s age. And that really, if you read A Court of Thorn and Roses, that's definitely really more where it fits. And you do kind of want to think about whether you want, because
What about, what is it? Tiny Little Things, or the Million Little Pieces that was
Yes.
fiction.
debunked.
Really not, or whatever, right? So.
And I mean, Go Ask Alice is that too by Anonymous. We know who Anonymous is now. We know that's not nonfiction anymore.
All right, so I want to bring us back to basics a little bit. No, that's fine. So what is the difference between a challenged book and a banned book? And then just to go with that, why do we celebrate banned books?
Well, a challenged book is, I wrote it down, books that a person or a group has tried to remove or restrict access to in schools or libraries. So a challenged book is one where concerns have been expressed, right? A banned book is one where that removal becomes successful. So challenging versus banning, right? And why do we celebrate Banned Books Week? Because it's I get excited. So it's about the freedom to read. It's about the freedom to read, and it's about our choices and being able to have access to information. It's a celebration, really. I think it's a cornerstone of democracy. You know, this is what we do. It celebrates libraries. It's also not just librarians. It's teachers. It's publishers. It's the whole book industry. Anyone connected to books, readers, everybody can celebrate Banned Books Week. And it's about our choices. I know some libraries call it Freedom to Read Week, which I love too. You know, I think it's just great to be able to celebrate the fact that that's what we offer here. That's what the public library offers, is people the choice to find whatever information they want, right?
And I think it's like, there are things in this library that will offend everyone. I mean, that's like a saw, but I think that it's really interesting. Like, there's so many different pieces of material in a library that, I mean, by definition, you have to disagree with some of them because they contradict each other.
Right.
So it's like intelligent design we have books on that. Like, we have books on, I don't even know if that's still what they're calling it, but I remember that was the last time I thought about intelligent design, was it was called intelligent design, but like, and it can be like, and where you put it, like, I mean, then there's a conversation about like, does intelligent design go in the 500s or does it go in the 200s? That means science or religion. And that's another way to like categorize, and you can organize information in ways that
I think another important aspect of the Banned Books Week, or, you know, Freedom to Read Week, or whatever we want to call it, is it does call attention to the harms of censorship. And that's not what we're about, right? We want to provide free and open access to information with multiple points of view so that people can find their books.
I think, you know, it's Banned Books Week because that sounds more horrific.
Oh, yeah.
Challenged books, because then you might confuse that with challenging books. We have a display here at the Medford Library on Banned Books Week, and it's got the big caution tape, caution, don't read these books. And one of our staff was telling me yesterday that he walked past it and this gentleman stopped and was like, what is this about? Banned books, these are books that have been challenged in other libraries and successfully removed from the shelves. Like, why would anyone do that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and just building that awareness that this is something that we tend to take for granted, but there are individuals and organizations that are trying to push back on that freedom of access to information that is a cornerstone to our democracy. And I've gotten really involved, or not involved, that's the wrong word, interested in Salman Rushdie, given the recent attack on his life, and started reading his memoir called Joseph Anton, where he's talking about the publishing industry's response to the fatwa and publishing companies also being threatened when he was threatened. And he's just sitting there going, I don't understand. Like, why are people not speaking up for the freedom of publishing in America? And I was like, wow, you know, how real is that? So, yeah.
All right, I have to share my screen again for this next question. Let's see. All right, so here we have two books that are in our collection that people in various parts of the country have asked their local libraries to remove from the collection. Can you talk a little bit about why they might be challenged, and then how you determine if something should remain in a collection? And the two examples we have here are picture books One is Heather Has Two Mommies, and it was originally published in 1989, but it has since come out with some updated illustrations. And then the other one is Julian is a Mermaid, which was published in 2018.
So I think that one of the things that I find fascinating about this slide is that what you're seeing, even though we're looking at updated illustrations for Heather Has Two Mommies. So I'm gonna like date myself a little and say I remember what the early version of this looked like. And it wasn't the sort of picture book that you looked at and thought, that looks like a good book to read with my kid. As somebody who, you know, came up in libraries when there was very limited availability of representation of LGBTQIA plus individuals in books of any kind, let alone children's books, Heather Has Two Mommies has become a classic because it was one of those very, very early books that was available. And what you see in Heather Has Two Mommies is a title that is I mean, this is a book about Heather Has Two Mommies. And what's interesting is like it was thought of as being something that filled a niche in a library collection. But here's the thing about Heather. Heather knows what it's like to have two mommies. She doesn't need a book telling her about two mommies. Like, and so we've moved on from these books that are niche books that aren't really very appealing. And by not very appealing, I mean, like, I'm serious. This book that you're looking at right now is beautifully packaged. It's got good illustrations. It used to be like not great illustrations, and the way the text flowed was awkward. It wasn't a kind of picture book that was welcoming or inviting. And now it looks lovely, which is great. The new illustrations are from 2015. I was really happy to see it, but the story is still the same story. While people might want to challenge it because they're worried about, you know, what happens often is that people in a library will say something like, well, I don't want my child inadvertently picking a book about two mommies because I would rather my child not know that such families exist, and I don't want them to think
Or learn it that
yeah,
way.
or like I want to have those conversations in my own way, or I want to make sure that, you know, I introduce the topic. There's lots of different ways that this can come up. That's right. So, but the whole plot of this is about Heather and her two mommies and the fact that she goes to, and it does support something that might be a real experience for a child in the 80s who had two mommies, where they go to school and they realize that all of their other friends have different numbers of mommies, but there's also other unconventional like family structures. Like you know, I live with my grandparent is one of the family structures named. And then they find out that, you know, it's okay to have whatever number of mommies that you have in your house, be that 0 or 2 or 1. And that's great, but then you've got this evolution to books like Julian is a Mermaid, which is, and from its inception was a beautiful picture book by Jessica Love. And this is a book that hits a lot of different, it's a lovely story. It's about a little boy and his abuela, and he wants to dress up like a mermaid, and his abuela helps him figure out how to do that in a way that works for him and is supportive and loving and allows him to be who he is in a really kind of special and beautiful way. And it's got lovely representation of multiple body sizes and skin tones, and so it's a book that anybody might be interested in reading because it's an interesting story. It's not like a token book that's shoved in the collection so that you have something to give to the one person who might come in one day and say, do you have a book about two mommies? And I've been talking about this too long, but I'm really excited.
So Kristen, what are people objecting to in Julian is a Mermaid?
In Julian is a Mermaid, while Julian is a little boy, and he's a little boy who may or may not one day be interested in exploring other
Challenging gender norms.
He's challenging gender norms. This is not a book about a trans kid. He's a boy. They call him, he uses he, him pronouns. but there's all kinds of books about those transitions that kids are going through. And I know that they're controversial right now, but I do think that one of the things that's really important about them is that whether a child is exploring those identities for themselves or is going to school, almost certainly with kids who are exploring those. So it's either that they're needing to recognize that and have the feelings that they're feeling, because their feelings are valid and real, and they're getting to have those reflected back to them. And if they're not having those feelings, maybe they're learning a little bit of empathy for it, because I know that I grew up in a time where kids who were doing those sorts of things were de facto considered objects of fun, just like that it wasn't even a conversation. And I don't think that's a kind way to grow up. And I wish I grew up in a different way. I love that there are ways for kids to be a little bit more empathetic.
And that gets to the whole concept of the windows and the
Just
mirrors.
gonna say-
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I'll stop sharing it now, so we can talk about the windows and
Yeah,
mirrors.
speaking of windows and mirrors. Oh, sorry.
And also sliding
No,
doors.
I wasn't gonna bring, I was like, I've been talking enough, you guys can shut that. Go for it.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, no, windows is a picture into someone else's life, you can see what's, learn about people that are different from you. And a mirror reflects back your own experience, which is validating and important as well. So I think that's also what a library collection should do, is provide those opportunities, whichever.
And again, I talked to a lot of people apparently. I talked to someone yesterday who said, she is a person of color and she grew up going to a public school where most of her classroom reflected that diversity. And then when she got to middle school, her parents moved her to a private school where she became the only person of color. And so she wished she had been able to find books that are being published now about that experience of not looking like the people around you and that feeling of isolation that comes with that. And I think that both as a mirror for her and as a window for me to have empathy for a child in that situation. So, that's the importance of some of these things, but it's also the challenge of some of these that comes up, or why people challenge some of these materials, is because when you look at everything as a reflection of yourself, sometimes you lack that empathy for the people who need it to be a window.
Yeah. And I think that this also speaks to this. I think that there is pressure and a sense that whoa, it's too much. But there's this rebalancing that's happening. And there's also this need to basically go big or go home. And I'm not saying that in a you can't just have one book about Heather having two mommies. There are so many lived experiences of folks with different family configurations within that community. But you've also got, when you're talking about people of color, you've got kids growing up in situations where they need to see the reflection of being the only one, but you also, and people who need that as a window as well, but you also need to be able to see that urban community. And so nobody is just one thing, and there's no monolithic groups in all of these marginalized populations. How do you represent the diversity of all of these lived experiences? And the way is to have a big bucket of diversity, and we haven't had adequate coverage for a long time. And so there's this sense, I think, that a lot of books are coming out right now that hit the buttons, and some of it is because that's what's selling right now, and publishers are not charitable organizations. They're money. We can see that when we look at our bills for ebooks, right? So it's being bought. It's not just being bought by libraries, because we're not a big enough market to drive what publishing is publishing. Angie Thomas and Jason Reynolds blew the lid off of young adult fiction, and they realized they could make a lot of money with this, and now there's a lot of it out there. That when you have limited shelving space and you've been underrepresenting certain groups for a long time, to rebalance and to get to the point where you have this equity of representation within your collections, you maybe are buying proportionately more books by groups that have historically been underrepresented and do not represent the and the diversity that we see, like the majority, it's hard to even pin what the majority is anymore.
So talking about that rebalancing, I want to come back to this. How do we kind of determine what should remain in the collection? And I know we've talked about this a little bit throughout the discussion, but looking at that from a rebalancing perspective, kind of how do we determine, yes, this should stay, or no, this should go, or there's an updated version, like with Heather Has Two Mommies. How are those decisions made?
The selection part?
Well, the deselection, maybe.
Deselection. Well, again, I think we have a lot of tools that are data driven, right? And so I think there's a lot of talk about earning your keep on the shelf. So if a book hasn't been borrowed in a number of years by anyone, that is evidence that it is no longer of interest to the community in the same way. And therefore, maybe we don't need as many copies of it or whatever. Condition, as I think Kristen alluded to, is a big one. We want our collection to be attractive and inviting, and we want people to want to take it home. And so if something is falling apart or not welcoming, doesn't feel good to hold it, then that's, we can evaluate whether or not a replacement is necessary, right? And if we can get it, we certainly will.
Especially if it's been republished.
Right, there you go. There's a lot of reprints,
Right, if something is getting a reprint, that tells us.
Yeah, there's still a market for it, right?
And I can speak to a little bit of my own experience with this, with previous position, where what we were doing is we were really updating the collection, the picture book collection, and we had some pushback from the community because what we were getting rid of were some of these foundational texts. And what wasn't being recognized is that we were replacing them with books like is Mermaid and other books that show diversity in better ways and that have artwork and that have that are presented in a way that's more appealing, because this is pretty dated, even though it's just 2015. This artwork is pretty dated.
Yeah.
And that has no appeal when it's on the shelf. Like we want things that grab your attention, things that really happen to feature so many different folks that are fun to read. And
all right. So we've mentioned several times this idea of having a well-rounded or a diverse collection. And I'm wondering, how do libraries and librarians overcome their personal biases that the individual librarian or selector might bring when they are ordering books and when they are looking at the collection? So how do we overcome that bias so we can ensure that it is well-rounded and diverse, representing everyone in our community?
Well, I would say that it's a constant balancing act, honestly. I think we have foundational documents like our collection development policy that instruct us. We have the Library Bill of Rights. We have things like that. And again, it's not about me, it's about the readers and the community. And certainly, and so I think we all do our best. We also have a lot of tools. I mean, as Lauren alluded to, we use industry, professional journals with reviews. We have vendors that specialize in providing library materials. We use data analysis. There are a lot of different ways that we try to create. I mean, a ridiculous example is I don't read horror books. I don't. They're scary. And I don't need that in my life. I really don't. But I know, and I don't watch horror movies either. But I know that it's a hugely popular thing. That doesn't mean I'm not going to order it for our library. Certainly not. Because I know that it's of interest to people in the community. And so I want to make sure that we can provide the things that people are wanting and reading, So it's, sometimes I actually think, if depending on my personal reaction, I mean, and then we talk to each other. I know that's another, resource is if I'm ever having a question about something, I will talk to Lauren and, and we can bounce ideas off of each other. We can collaborate and figure out, do the merits of the book, what's going on here? Is this just me or, I think we have to check ourselves,
And we can find opportunity, like there is disagreement amongst librarians about certain things. I mean, of course we saw the numbers about librarians challenging books, but you get us in a room and you ask us to talk about Dr. Seuss or Little House on the Prairie, and we will have a debate. I don't think.
Not tonight.
Not tonight. This is not the place to have that conversation, but like that is like,
Right.
There's a lot of conversation to be had on this.
We do have, I guess, kind of built-in check and balances to help overcome those personal biases. We may have someone who's really passionate about local history, so they help make sure that collection is
Right.
current and or not current, depending on how you're looking at history. But we have people with special interests, and then we have people who are overlooking everything. And then I also think that that's a just a purchase
I was
where
gonna say that.
patrons can tell us, hey, you missed one. Helps us too. And again, we put that into the conversation, we decided not to buy this book because we weren't sure. And then 3 people asked for it. And we're like, oh, okay, well, that's a pretty good indicator that we should add that to our collection. And so we use, honestly, the community itself is part of our check and balance because
And
we are
there's-
asking them to tell us what they want.
And there are so many books. There are so many books that are published. There are so many.
Yeah, and I would tell our patrons, don't use your suggestions for the really popular books that we're gonna get. Use it for those niche books that we might not have seen. Maybe we didn't look at that particular magazine that was talking about it.
We know who Danielle still is.
Yes, we will always buy that.
We do. We will buy those books.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's a balancing act, and I think it's a constant, we can't lose sight of doing our job.
Right.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes people will say things like, well, I see you have more copies of that book by the person with that affiliation and political affiliation, and then maybe you have fewer books by this other person with it. And so that means that you've decided that you're gonna, and I'm intentionally not naming names, so this is gonna be intentionally vague, but like, so say you have a ton of books of this thing that has one political leaning and you've got far fewer of this one. A lot of that purchasing is based on how many people are holding it. So when you look or placing it on hold, so when you look at why are they buying so many more copies of that book about that person with whom I disagree, look at the holds lists and see, because there's a reason, like we're doing that. Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. One of the issues that parents face when their child accesses a well-rounded and diverse collection is that sometimes they find materials that the parent does not want them to have access to. And we've touched on this a little bit during the evening. While those parents can request that an item be removed from our collection, this also makes the decision for other parents who may not want to remove access. How do you suggest a parent navigates this issue?
As a parent?
You're all like-
Well, no, as a parent of 2 tween kids, I think, I do the best I can, honestly. But I think, I want to talk to my kids. I want to know what they're watching on TV. I want to know what shows they're interested in. I want to know what video games they're playing. I want to know what they're watching on YouTube. I want to know, these are things that as a parent, I want to stay engaged with my kids in the same way. I want to know what they're reading. And whether that means going to the library with my kids and or in my case, placing holds for my kids.
You bring it home.
That's how I just want to, for me, I just try to do my best to stay engaged with what my kids are interested in and work to have conversations along the way.
And I think as a non-parent and as just that objective, what is our role? And I think this is what censorship comes down to, you know, a definition of censorship is one person making a decision for everybody. And I absolutely respect every individual parent's right to monitor and understand and be a part of that decision for their kids, but not for somebody else's kids. I've had conversations, one challenge that I had to work was a foster parent who was listening to Matilda by Roald Dahl with her younger kids, like 5, 6-year-old. And she objected to one of the scenes where the teacher is kind of being abusive. And she was just like, in my world, you don't even make fun of that. And how do I prevent my kids from listening to something that I didn't think they should? And so, you know, I talked with her, I showed her how we have the age level, you know, sometimes it's printed on the book or on the review or on our website to say, yeah, you know what, it's recommended for 10 years old and up. So might not be appropriate for your 5-year-old. So, but we can help you. That's why we're here. We're here to help you navigate this very complicated and diverse collection that we have so that you can find things that support your values, support your parenting style. You know, we're here to help you with that. We're here to help every parent with that.
And if you let us know, we will help you find, like, I've had people say, well, we don't do witches back in the day when Harry Potter was controversial for different reasons and so how do I help this parent find books for their child? I know the boundary, like no witches, I can do that.
Right.
So now I've got a framework to help from. I'm not going to try and give that kid books about witches if mom doesn't want the kid to have books on witches. But it's also important, I think, to note here that the Library of Bill of Rights specifically empowers libraries to ensure access to everybody. And one of the criteria that should not be a barrier, one of the things that is specifically called out is age. No matter what the age, if somebody says, I want a book about this thing, like that could mean different things. And that's how we do we're trained to do reference interviews. We know what's appropriate and we can develop we can figure it out by working with the person that we're talking to. But if a kid has a legitimate concern, we don't say, does your parent know that you're interested in this? We say, okay.
Well, and I will say one of the classic examples that I've heard over my career is, why do you let kids check out R-rated movies, right? They can't go to an R-rated movie in the movie theater. Why do you let them? And it's like, and it goes back to that, we don't act in the place of parents, and we're not here to police any access. And it seems okay, like if you're like in a small library and you're like, oh, I know Johnny's parents wouldn't like him to have that. Well, we can't be there every time. And so by saying, oh yes, we'll make sure Johnny doesn't check out R-rated movies, it puts some liability back on us as an institution that we just can't sustain. And so, you know.
And I've worked in a library in a community where it was very common for young children with their families to watch horror movies. I don't.
Your house.
Yeah, you might not see our house, but like I had little kids who had clearly, and by little kids, I'm not talking about toddlers. I'm talking about like say a 9-year-old coming through and saying, you know, I've watched, like I knew that they'd seen it before, and they're wanting like Freddy Krueger movies.
I've heard this before. I know there are families like that.
And that's okay, you know
you
them, and they
Yeah.
like and that's supported by their parents.
Yeah.
And those specific families would feel judged if we turned around and all of a sudden said we can't support that, that's bad. We
That's
can't be
not
doing
our
that.
job.
That is their job to make those decisions for their parents, and they have every right
It's a
to.
responsibility.
Yeah.
It's important that the library is an open and welcoming place to everyone.
Yeah.
And removing that judgment is very important, whether
Absolutely.
it's for, you know, or with the parents or the romance novels.
Well, and sorry, another thing is if I'm 10 and my parents aren't happy with each other and I'm wondering, like, what do I do? Who can I go get help from? And I can find a book that talks about abuse or something. that child has a right for their parents not to know they've checked out that book. And that's the other part of the freedom to read statement in our Bill of Rights is regardless of age, we want you to have the information you need. And there are times, and this is why, you can't hook up your spouse's holds because you know what? She's checking out a book on how to file for divorce.
I have actually seen
so-
that happen.
Yeah. These
I
are
have
all
two,
real life
I have two,
examples.
so.
But that's like the cornerstone of our right to privacy. And, the 306s, don't talk about sexuality, those are very frequently hidden in the stacks when, so that teenagers can go look for them without anybody knowing that they're looking for them. And, yeah.
I apologize for my awkward laughter. I laugh at awkward times. But no, I've definitely been in those situations before too, where it's like, no, I know what's going on and you are not supposed to. And I don't want to know, but I do.
Yeah, when any of those situations where it's you can come, they sound improbable, I think, to people who don't work in libraries, but a lot of things that happen in public libraries sound improbable to people who have never worked in a public library, and weird things happen all the time, and you end up in these very awkward personal situations because reading preferences and information seeking behaviors can be incredibly personal and private. And some of that is really that does tie into First Amendment rights. The need to not, put a chilling effect on people's feelings about we got very protective of people's borrowing records around the time of the Patriot Act.
Sure,
too.
yes.
You could imagine a scenario, that could have identifying people's faiths based on what books from the 200s they've collected could that's not something that we would support or would want to have happen. That's not our role, and they have privacy to explore those religious.
Right.
Well, I just want to swing back really quickly to the
point.
The question, something that was really brought up is we're here and we are experts and we believe really passionate about these things. We know so much about these books and we really wish people used us more.
Yeah.
We really
Yes.
do wish you came up to the desk and asked, hey, my son, he doesn't like to read. I don't know what to do. Here are the things that I don't feel comfortable with him reading. What should I get? And we love those questions and we really do want to help.
Absolutely.
Right. And for all of that, we're talking about diversity and having a diverse collection, we are also absolutely respectful of what you want your child to read, right? So we're not going to suggest books that you don't want that child to read. And so don't be afraid to approach us because you're like, oh, they're going to make me read X. No, we listen to what you want, what your kid wants, and we go from there. Yeah.
Because our goal is for you to read.
Right, exactly.
We have all these books and we would like you to check them.
Yes. Well, all right, if you find a title that you really think should not be part of the collection or should be in a different area, what's the process to have it reviewed here at JCLS? And then after that, I want to ask, have any books been challenged in our libraries? So let's first go process question.
Well, it's back to the collection development policy. I know you can't read it, but I'm still going to talk to it. We take these things very seriously, and it is actually spelled out how this process works in the policy. Basically, how it works is you get the form. We have an actual form process. You can print it out. It's the last page of the policy, or you can just come to the desk and we will print it out for you. Go ahead and fill that out with information about the material and why you believe it should be either moved or removed entirely, whatever action you want the library to take. We do suggest you be as specific as possible because that really helps. And then it goes to the library director. So you can mail it directly to Carrie or turn it in at the desk, either way works. And then she gets to go make that decision and she will respond in writing. If that decision isn't what the person wants, they can appeal to the board And one thing I do want to point out is that items that are being asked to be reconsidered, they do remain in the collection while they're being reconsidered. So just be aware of that.
It's a conversation, right? And I mean, sometimes I know that there have been numerous experiences where someone might have a concern about a book and they come to someone at the desk, a library staff person, and have a conversation about it and express what they need to express about it. And maybe they never even need to fill out the form, right? Maybe you just, maybe it's enough to have a conversation and to be able to express concerns and maybe hear from the library's perspective what's going on. We can talk about the freedom to read. We can talk about what the public library is for, and maybe that is enough. But we do have a really solid process for evaluating, reevaluating, reconsidering what decisions were made.
And now kind of a follow-up real fast. Do they have to have read the book to challenge the book?
That is one of the questions that's on the form.
Okay.
is have you read it, or what part of it did you read? From my perspective, if the challenge or request comes to me, I do read the work in its entirety or watch the video in its entirety. I have had an experience where, someone listened to the first 20 minutes of an audiobook and said, I can't do any more of this, or handed it to me and said, start listening. This was back in the day, this tape at this exact spot. Like, okay, I will do that, but I can't just listen to it out of context. I have to read the whole work, a video, watching the whole video. And so that's part of why sometimes the process takes a while, is because I'm not a speed reader and I do need to look at the work in its entirety. And then we also look at things like the professional reviews that brought it to our collection, whether it's been an award-winning item, things like that. That all gets taken into that process.
So then the second part of the question was, have any books, or I guess we could ask, any materials, it doesn't have to specifically be a book, have materials been challenged at JCLS libraries?
So in the 4 years that I've been the director here, I have received 4 challenges.
Oh.
Coincidentally. One of them is currently under process and review right now. 2 of them were films. One, the Lassie film that I alluded to earlier, that was reclassified and reshelved in our adult collection. Another, the film Lolita, that was, the concern was that it depicts sexual exploitation. And, when we get into obscenity laws and what's, considered pornographic or not, and those definitions, that's where it gets kind of tricky when you're reviewing those things. And as you all know, Lolita, the book, is also a frequently challenged item.
Yes.
In that case, we did retain the item in the collection. And then the third one was a book called Rules of Summer, which is a picture book that the parent was concerned about the emotions that the book triggers, and was concerned about young children seeing that book. And again, in that case, we did the reviews and the research and determined to keep it where it was shelved originally. And in each of those 3 cases, the written response from me was the end of the conversation. And in my tenure here, there have been none that have gone to the Board of Trustees. But I will say, in another library I worked at, do y'all remember 50 Shades of Grey? So I was talking to my board and prepping them that this might be challenged. So I had one of my older board members going up to the circulation desk, like, can I check out that 50 something, and, trying to be proactive about understanding what the book was, and then getting really red in the face. He's like, no, it's for my wife. But, when we have these community awareness, I'll say, and as right now we're in this time of materials being challenged more frequently, making sure that staff know what to do and how to respond if a person comes in and asks. And then also for the board too, letting them know that there is something that may be coming to them, or something that they might need to be aware of, is an important part of that process, and helping them understand too, because while these statements have been around for a long time, and while Jackson County has adopted both the Freedom to Read and the Library Bill of Rights, we don't read them every day. Well, some of us do. The nerdy ones do, but we don't, they're not always front of mind for our board members as well. So just really making sure that we're aware of that whole conversation that's happening and recognizing that we absolutely respect the individual's concerns. And by having the conversation and reviewing the material, we do take those concerns seriously.
But some of what we're deciding when we're looking at that is not, is this book appropriate for this individual who doesn't like it? But is it inappropriate for the entire community, which is a very different question, which turns out it's just a different question.
Libraries are places for voluntary reading, right?
Yes.
It's
Especially the public library.
Put it down on the shelf.
Yeah.
Until you fill out the form and then I have to.
Well, that is the last of the planned questions. I'm looking at our Q&A and it doesn't look like anyone has put questions in there yet. But I do want to give you time and space to submit any questions that you might have for the panel. While we wait for those to come in, I'm going to throw some more out of left field that you didn't have time to plan for questions. Does anybody have a favorite book that has been, on the frequently challenged list or that's been banned somewhere? Any favorites out there?
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter? Oh, yes. I'm right there with you.
Of that top 10 list, I'm surprised that Bluest Eye is still on there.
Okay.
I read that a long time ago. And just remember being heartbroken by the story and, what the story depicts and just being like, anyway. But I'm surprised that it's still, because it was published in the 90s.
I think so, at least, yeah.
And that kind of speaks to, the surprise of the patron, the story about the patron who saw our display and said, well, why would anybody do that? I know I'm oftentimes struck by, throughout history, the books that have been banned and oh, really? I wonder why, it can be very surprising.
And sometimes it's not for the reason you think it was.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to look at the lists and see some of that.
Yeah, you get those great Anne Carroll Moore stories in the books that she didn't want in the New York Public Library children's section, like Stuart Little or Goodnight Moon, which are, of course, now classics that we would never think that we wouldn't want in a library.
Well, but okay, let's talk on the reverse.
Mhm.
Dr. Seuss.
You said we were going to talk about that.
But, the difference between what someone writes and what someone, how they act. So you take a beloved Dr. Seuss, and you're like, the publisher made the decision to no longer reprint some of his
Is the
books.
state made the
Is the state, excuse me.
Right.
So it's the owner of the rights at that point.
Right.
Sorry, not to quibble.
Right, but so,
But I'm quibbling anyway.
well, yeah, I mean, so not to go down that rabbit hole, but
Right,
yeah,
right.
like Little House on the Prairie. I loved it as a kid. I read an article about a parent who read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to her 8-year-old son, and he was like all over it. And she's like, now that I'm a parent, I'm like, I don't know that I agree with, the world he created. But when I was 8, I loved it too, right?
It's a good little allegory, so there's that.
Did you give a favorite?
No.
No, okay, you don't
I
have to.
can't pick on my
No. Mine, I always go back to 1984 because it's the fact that it gets banned or gets challenged. The irony of it is just too good.
Too sweet to.
Right.
Fahrenheit 451.
Yes, Fahrenheit 451,
Yeah.
yes. All right, well, still no questions from the audience. Any final words from our panelists?
I just want to say, I hope what has come across is just how seriously we take this and how important freedom to read, how important privacy, all those things are to us. and that we've rekindled your desire to come to the library if you haven't been here recently, and to ask a librarian for assistance.
Anyone else?
Man.
Now, I am going to put some links in the chat from some articles that we mentioned here, or some of the
We also have you finish saying what you're saying.
oh, well, just some links for you to get some more reading.
Ooh, and
Why
then
is
a
it
question.
not?
If we can make it work.
Okay, for
Aw.
some reason, it is not letting me copy and paste this. What I can do is just send out the list of resources to everyone who registered.
Did you try Control V?
I did.
It's because we have chat, it's like, I think, anyway.
It's,
Anyway,
yeah,
it's because we're not the technical people.
There's
right.
also, we also in the Library Connect blog do have an article about the freedom to read statement and the origin. So if you want to do a slightly deeper dive into the origin of that specific statement, there's some more information there.
All right, so we do have one question here from the audience. Angie asks, or she says, I am a fan of dystopian novels and have a great niece that also loves to read the genre. I have told her that I would send her a list of dystopian novels I recommend. Should I send the list first to her mom?
That, do you want me to take it as a children's librarian or do you want to take it as a parent?
I just say ask the mom.
Yeah, that's what I would say too. Because it depends on the situation. But I would also say that if mom is wanting to do and has really specific things about books that she's interested in trying to kind of filter for her child, that one source that we do often use when it's needed, we don't use this for collection development, for example, is a site called Common Sense Media. And it is it used to be completely free, and now you can only get like a few free views unless you pay, and the library pays, so you can come to us and we can like look them up for you, so that's one like reason to come talk to us. But it's got a really non-judgmental way of exploring the things that might be in that book that might be something that is for some kids, but may not be something that would be supported by all families. It's not like, we wouldn't use it to censor a book list or something like that, but we might provide it as a resource. So if that's something that the parent says yes, then that might be a resource that parent would be interested in as well.
Well, I will say too, coming from a family where my mom was a junior high school language arts teacher and I'm the librarian, you know, my niece and nephew, sometimes my mom and I fight over who gets to share book lists with them. When my nephew was really young, you know, my mom is like recommending all his books and he was like, let's ask Carrie, she's a librarian. So that had definitely much more cachet than maybe a school teacher, I guess. But, you know, I mean, if you have that relationship with your great niece, you know, even just an offhand mention to mom, like, hey, she asked for some books and I'm so excited to share it with her, or something like that, and, you know, use that as a gauge as well. And I would say, you know, my inclination would not be necessarily first, but maybe to both of them or whatever, so that, you know.
Yeah, we also have a service called JCLS Discovery, and you can find that through the library website. It's basically form-based reader's advisory, and you can fill out a form and tell us what you like reading, and we'll pop out a list for you. That it came out during the pandemic and it isn't as well used anymore, but it's still a resource that is valid. And the resource name that I was talking about first is Common Sense Media, and it would be all one word. I believe it's Common Sense. I think it's commonsensemedia.org. It may work with either at this point. But if you Google it, I think it'll be the top result. It's pretty, well developed website. And it has kid reviews and parent reviews
And movies and.
Yep, and you can see like the kid thinks it's for this age and up, the kid reviewer and the parent reviewer thinks it's for this age and up. So it's kind of interesting to see those differences as well.
Thanks. Thank you all for this wonderful conversation. I just want to plug one more opportunity for families to talk about literature together. Our Rogue Reads celebration is happening in December through February. We always select 4 different titles, and the whole goal is for families to have the opportunity to have intergenerational conversations around books and particular themes. So be on the lookout for more information on that soon. So that's my last plug for the night. Thank you everyone for attending. Oh, that was the follow-up, yeah. Cool. All right, well, thank you. And the recording will be available on our JCLS Beyond YouTube page. So y'all have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.